now that I have control over the webinar, I'll be able to show my screen. So you should be able to see my screen with the Harmony Storyboard Pro and Toon Boop logo. And I'll start Storyboard Pro. So as I was saying, I'll be going over the new features of Storyboard Pro this time. I won't be going into details on workflow, but really showing you how the new feature works inside Storyboard Pro 5. First thing you see is, well, the welcome screen. The welcome screen has the gray interface. So we have introduced a gray interface in Storyboard Pro, just like we have in Harmony for Harmony 12. And the one thing that's, well, for sure, the welcome screen layout has changed a little bit. It's very similar to the one we have in Harmony now. And one feature that's already visible from the welcome screen here is the camera size. So this contains a list of presets for your camera resolution and frame per second. And you can see that we have a preset here called HGTV 1080p 23976, which means that we now support a frame rate with decimal values. As long as it's a non-drop frame timecode, you'll be able to use it inside Storyboard Pro. We only added one in the preset list because that's the most common one that's used, but you can create your own and you can use any frame rate that you want just by clicking the plus button here and setting the value that you want, either by typing it or selecting something from the preset list and creating the new preset. So I'll just launch Storyboard Pro. And this is the default interface. As you would, I'm just looking because sometimes I play around with my workspace. Now I'm sure I have the default workspace. And if you're familiar with the previous version of Storyboard Pro, there's not much changes except, well, it's dark, but all the buttons are pretty much at the same place. The drawings on the buttons have changed a little bit. There's a couple of extra buttons in the toolbars that were not there in the past by default. For example, the last frame and the first frame button here that you can use to go from the first frame and the last frame in the current panel. I'll show you why later why we added this to our default workspace. We also have a couple of new tools here. We have the maintain size tool that's used to push objects on the z-axis and preserve their size in the camera view. And we have the surface create layer on surface tool here that I'll show you a little bit later. Apart from that, we have a couple of changes in the layer interface here. The one thing is that we changed the order of the buttons. So the little eyes to enable and disable a layer are on the top. They're not in the middle anymore. And then under it, you have the lock. And under it, when you have the onion skin enabled, you have the background mode that you can turn on. So the background mode hides a layer in the onion skin so that if you have a background with a solid black back, you don't want to see it in your onion skin because it will hide everything. So the other thing that's new in here is I have the little character here, the little stick man standing straight, and this is to decide if I want to animate. It's actually a button that, and when I click, this thing turns on the animation mode for that layer, and I'll show you that a little bit later. Apart from that, it's pretty much the same, the interface, apart from the extra new feature that we have, and let me go through all of that right now. So the first thing I want to show you is that we have introduced the same kind of bitmap technology that we have inside Harmony. So we already have bitmap drawing tools inside Storyboard Pro, the previous version, but we've improved the technology to add a lot more natural looking and a lot more customizable brushes. So yeah, one thing I need to warn you is that I'm not very good at drawing, so I'll try to do my best to show you these drawing tools. So we have a couple of presets that you can use to draw with in the software, and so we have quite a lot actually. But if a preset doesn't match what you're looking for, you can actually go and edit your own preset and create your own preset. So if you click on the arrow here or double click the preview here, this opens the bitmap brush properties, where you can select the tip. So this is the part that's new inside this this new technology that we've introduced inside the Storyboard Pro 5, is that you can select a small drawing, a small texture as the tip for your brush. And that tip will be repeated with different spacing that you can specify here. You can add some randomness if you want. I'll just remove all the randomness so we can see how it works normally. So let's say I have this tip here. And you see if I click and I drag, this just stamps the same tip at regular intervals. So I'll just make this shorter. And when I use it, you can see it just repeats the tip over and over, which is not very natural looking. So what you want to do when you're working with those types of brushes is you want to most likely add some randomness. So I usually add a random angle all the way to 360 degrees, so which means that this will rotate the tip randomly up to 360 degrees. I'll also like to add some random size and some random spacing just to make it a little bit more natural looking. Also the new options that you have are the roundness that you can change for the tip and the angle. But since I have the random angle, it doesn't really make much sense that I change the angle here. Like that. And you also have a couple of other tabs. So you have the transparency, which you can define the maximum flow. So this is the maximum amount of paint that will be applied for each tip when I'm drawing with my Wacom stylus here. If I apply the maximum pressure, the minimum flow, I can lower that if I want to. Same thing for the opacity, maximum opacity, minimum opacity. And then I have randomizers for these as well. So I can randomize the flow and the transparency. So if I remove all the randomness, you see that they're all the same opacity or transparency. As I apply more or less pressure, if I do a little bit of randomness here, you'll see that there will be randomness. So the next option that we have here, or the next tab, is the dual tip. So the dual tip can be used to combine two tips together. We have actually three modes to combine the tips. Either multiply them, which kind of does a intersection. So whatever intersects between the two tips will be what will be drawn on screen. You have the color dodge, and you also have the combine. So the combine will actually use both tips together. I usually just use the multiply one, and I pick a tip here that will be used to cut my other tip. So if I use this now, you see it really changed the way my brush looked like. And I can reduce a little bit the hardness to make it softer. And I have the same parameters that I have on the tip for my second tip that I use on my brush. There you go. And the last option here, so let me turn off the tip, the dual tip here, and let me just take a very normal tip and removing the transparency, the randomness and the transparency, and the randomness and the size. So is the paper texture. So we still have the same kind of technology that we had in the past, where instead of plotting a tip randomly with different spacing, we have the paper texture. So this is basically a texture that will be revealed as you draw. So if I take one that's visible, so when I draw, you can see that the texture is revealed and it's not something that's stamped at different spacing or different angle like the other tip is. So if you want to add or work like a canvas, you can import a canvas texture and use this as your paper texture, combine with the tip and combine with the tool tip. So you can combine everything together. In the paper texture, we have two options here at the bottom. We have additive and aligned. If you select align, this means that all the textures will always be aligned together. All the strokes will always use the same alignment for the texture, so it really looks like a paper. If I uncheck that, the texture will be actually random, so it won't align, so it will add a bit of randomness there. And the additive is to be able to draw on top. My spacing, maybe my flow is a bit high here. Maybe I should lower my flow a little bit, like this. And when I use additive, If I'm drawing and I come back over my brush, it makes it harder, darker. But if I don't have the additive, it doesn't add up when I draw over it. It just stays the same. For sure, if I release and I come back, then it will add, but it doesn't add on the same stroke. If I put additive, you can see it becomes really a lot darker, a lot faster. So now I'll show you a couple of examples of drawings that were made using these tools. So for example, here, Terry here. So Terry was drawn with vector. So the line art was all drawn on vector, but the coloring inside was done using bitmap layers. And you can differentiate bitmap layers from vector layers by looking at the color bar here. So there's a small color bar on the left. If it's gray, this is because it's a vector layer. If it's blue, this is because it's a bitmap layer. So you can see I have one bitmap layer here and another bitmap layer there. I have a couple of other examples here. I have a welding gun that's used to repair the ship and the sample material we're preparing. And we have Terry and Selena here that are blasting off, and you can see the smoke. Now this brings me to another thing are the groups. So another feature we added inside Storyboard Pro 5 are groups. So you can now group layers together. So you can better organize your work and have less layers stacked up. So for example, Terry here has, I don't know how many layers, 7 layers, 6 layers. And if I want to turn off all the layers, I can just simply turn off the whole group, and this will turn off every layers. I can also use the group to manipulate all the layers together. So I don't have to select all the layers here by shift clicking them. I can just select the group and move them. So this is really convenient and makes it a lot faster to manipulate your drawings. Now, the next thing I want to show you is the maintain size tool. So the maintain size tool is really useful when you want to move something on 3D because you want to create a parallax effect. So you want to move a camera and you want to have the foreground, the background, and the character moving at different speeds. So I'll just import a couple of drawings here and my character right there. So I'll move the character at the top, and this is the background at the bottom right there. And if I look here in my top view, everything's at the same level. Everything is at the 0Z depth. Now what I want to do is I want to move them on the Z-axis, because when I have a camera move, I'll do right here, I want to see all the drawings moving at different speeds. So let me just go in my timeline here, make this panel a little bit longer. Like that. You can see that if I'm scrolling, everything is moving at the same speed because everything is at the same depth. So now I'll want to use my maintain size tool to move them back on the Z-axis. But to do that, I will need to make sure I'm in 3D, because if I try to do that right now, actually it will work, but you will see that it will turn on the 3D mode for my scene. So if you look here, when I take my background, for example, and I move it backwards, you can see that now my scene is 3D. And you can see that when I'm moving it backwards, it kind of scales, and which it shouldn't. The reason why it's scaling is because I'm not looking through the camera right now. I'm just in the stage view. And in the stage view, if I rotate like this, I can have any kind of point of view. So I'm not really looking through the camera. So it seems like it's growing because it's actually scaling. But if I look through the camera, the actual scale here will not be happening anymore because it's scaling through with the camera. It's a little bit moving because it's coming closer to the camera or farther, but it's actually not moving, but it's just going on the side. So now that I have this, if I move my camera again, you'll see that, and I should take this and I should move him a little bit down like this. There we go. So I've added 3D depth to my scene. So if I'm moving my camera, I have the parallax effect. And I didn't have to worry about changing the scale of the layers that I'm moving, because they scale up and down to be able to always keep the same size inside the panel here. Now, the other thing I want to show you is the sharing of layers. So I have a background here in this scene, and this background will be used in all the panels in my scene. And so I'll want to reuse the same drawing. In the past, whenever you duplicated a panel, it would make a new copy of the drawing. Now I have an option called Share Drawings. And when I use that, a little star appears next to the name of the layer to show that this layer is now shared. When the layer is shared, if I go to my library view, I have a shared folder. I can see the shared drawing here inside my library. This allows me to go into another scene somewhere in my project and reuse that layer in another panel, and it will be the same drawing. So now if I duplicate this panel, not duplicate, it doesn't really, you don't see any changes here. It's just like you would know in the past. But if I make a modification now to that tree, let's say I want to add some apples in that tree because that's the only thing I'm good at drawing. Let me remove there we go. So a little bit bigger. So if I draw apples now in the tree on this panel, this will, and I had this will also be reflected on the previous panel here. So both panels now have the same drawing. So any modification I do, if I take my eraser tool, I erase a portion of my tree, this will be reflected on, let me see here. And actually, this is an old drawing here that was made in an old version, and I cannot really edit it. Sorry, but any changes that I would make to this drawing will be reflected on the other panels. But any changes that I do on the boy here, since the boy is not a shared layer, will only be on this specific panel. Now, the other thing that's new inside this version here, and I'll just draw a make my very quick version of the tree here on the background and a cloud layer. So another thing that's new is you can actually have more than just a start and an end position for when you're doing but layer movement. So in the past, you only had a start and an end. Now you can have multiple keyframes to do whatever you want. I'm using this on a cloud because that's the only thing I'm good at drawing. And I'll just show you here. So I have my cloud layer here. And if I use my transform tool, so you'll notice I don't have the first and the last frame transform tools anymore. I only have the transform tool. And if I use the transform tool on the cloud, this will actually move the cloud for the whole duration of my scene. So it does a static transformation to my cloud. It doesn't do any interpolation. If I want to animate this, I need to click on the little guy here on the layer. So first thing I'll do is I'll make sure I'm at the start of the panel, or I'm at the frame I want to start my my move. So I'll move just a couple of frames after the start of the panel. I'll click the little guy here. Now the guy becomes yellow. He's running, which shows me that the layer is animated. I go to the other frame where I want to position my cloud. I move my cloud like this, and you can see now that I have a spline. So I have a path for my layer, and you can see that I have animated my cloud layer on here. And I can actually add as many keys as I want. So if I go to any frame and I move the cloud, you'll see that it will add all of these keyframes. And any keyframe can have rotation, scaling, those three types of operations. And you can remove the extra keyframes by selecting them and pressing not pressing the delete key there. So one good thing about these keyframes is that if you're using if you have your tool properties side on the side here, you have a lot of options now to navigate. So you have the previous keyframe button that you can use to go from one keyframe to another. You have the delete keyframe button here, so if you want to delete the keyframes, and you have the reset keyframe button here that resets the keyframe, which I don't want to do. There we go. Now I've reset or deleted all the extra keyframes. And if you want to have a little bit more control over the speed or the shape, you can actually go in the function editor. So if I click on this button here, this opens the function editor for my selected layer. And here I can see the path, XYZ, the velocity. Let me just reset this. Actually, I'll hide the path. I just want to see the velocity like that. And you see now the velocity is just a straight line, so it doesn't have any ease in or ease out. And I can easily add some ease in or ease out by selecting one of the presets from here. And you can see I have an ease in to my movement and then an ease out. Goes like this. And if I want to adjust the curve here, I can use the handle. So this is not a Bezier curve. This is an ease curve. You can adjust the angle, but you can also adjust the duration. So if you press an hold the Command Alt on Mac or Control Alt on Windows, you can actually adjust the length of the ease very easily visually. If you want to do it by numbers, you can click on the arrow here, and you can see the values for the selected key. So if I select the first one, you see that has an angle of 180, and it goes over 19 frames. And there we go, like that. And if I change the duration here, you'll see how the value changes. There we go. So that's a very convenient view if you really need to fine-tune the layer motion or even the camera motion. So the function editor also works with the camera. So if I have a camera motion here, something like this, I can open the function editor using this button here, and this opens the function editor, and I'm able to see, let's say, the velocity for my. I don't have any move. The velocity for my camera and the path. So that's a convenient way to adjust your fine-tune the motion inside your Storyboard Pro. So, Lizzie, any questions have risen up so far?
Yes, we have lots of questions. John Keane, Dave Brown have some really interesting questions. So I'll start with just a few.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, do the texture tips bump up the file size as in the previous version?
So if I'm using, I need to use a bitmap layer to do that. So the difference between a vector and a bitmap layer is, well, of course, so this is a vector layer here. If I zoom in on it, it's just a very solid line. It has a very sharp line that if you zoom in or out, or if you scale, rotate, or move it, you don't lose any quality. It's always the same drawing because this is a mathematical expression of the drawing. And when I add a bitmap layer, I'm drawing bits like on a grid, right? And let me just take something different here. Soft lead. So if I'm using this here and I'm drawing here and I zoom in, you can see I have pixels that make up this drawing. So each of those pixels are information inside my drawing, and it takes a little bit more information to express or to save the drawing on file when it's a bitmap rather than a vector, because it has to keep track of all the pixels in the drawing. But whether I'm using a tip that has a texture or a tip that has no texture, whatever tip I'm using for my bitmap brush doesn't make any difference. I'm just creating a bitmap, and the bigger my drawing is, the more memory it will take. The same thing that would happen if you were in in Photoshop, for example. Now, one thing you have to be aware with the bitmap tools is that if I make a very small drawing, so if I just make a little character here, you don't really see it, but internally this just creates a drawing that's this size. So it only saves this information. It doesn't save anything around it. So the bigger you create your drawing, the more pixels it has to keep track. And so if you're making just one big stroke like this, it might seem like a very light drawing, but it's actually one big drawing. We don't save the whole thing, but anyway, we do some optimizations, but this is a lot heavier than if this was just a vector line. It would be a very, very, very light drawing. But since it's a bitmap brush, you have to take into consideration that this has all these pixels.
Cool. So the next question is regarding version 4 and version 5. So is it possible to open more than one project at a time in version 5?
Well, it's yes and no, because you cannot open 2 projects at the same time inside Storyboard Pro, but you can have 2 Storyboard Pro running. So right now I'm running one instance of Storyboard Pro, and I can launch a second instance of Storyboard Pro. So if you're using a Mac, this is something that a lot of Mac users don't know, but if I look in my dock and I try to click here, I cannot start a second instance of Storyboard Pro. But if I go in the Finder and I click on the application icon, this will start a second instance. So then you can have 2 instances of Storyboard Pro running at the same time, and you can open 2 different projects. And then you can copy paste drawings between them or any kind of data that you have. The other way of, I never used that way, but I guess you could just type Storyboard Pro here. Just make sure you have, I have many versions of Storyboard Pro, just make sure you pick up the right one. So if you have the, how is this called? The quick launch button, you can just type the application name, it will bring it on, and you can click on it and it will launch a second instance. My preferred way for me is to go in the Finder, and the fastest way to do that is to press and hold the Command key, click on the icon in the dock. This opens the Finder on that application. Alternatively, you can also just right click and say, can you do that? Show in Finder, and this will show you where it is in the Finder. I know some people like to use the Launchpad. I just have too many applications. I never use the Launchpad to launch applications from.
Cool. Can you show us how to change the background interface? People are wondering about the dark and light interface.
Yeah, that's very simple. So you just need to go into your preferences. So if you're running Mac, your preferences are under Storyboard Pro. Storyboard Pro menu on the left, and preferences. If you're running on Windows, it's under Edit, and it will be at the end of the Edit menu. Once you're in the preferences, if you go inside the global UI, there's an option called Use Dark Style Sheet, and if you uncheck this, it requires you to relaunch the software. So I'll just take this opportunity to launch a second instance of Storyboard Pro right here. And this one will start with the light UI. There we go. If I open, let's say, this project here, you'll see that I now have a light UI version of Storyboard Pro and a dark version of the UI for Storyboard Pro.
Cool. So another good question that we're getting is from students. So a couple of people have been asking if version 4.2 is compatible with version 5. If I start working in version 5, can someone who's using version 4.2 see my files? What's the compatibility and the backwards compatibility?
Yeah, that was the question I was expecting before. So in Storyboard Pro is always backward compatible, which means that anything that was created in a previous version can be opened in the new version, but it's not forward compatible, meaning that something that you create in the new version cannot be opened in the older version. And the reason is that we add new functionalities to the software. For example, the possibility to have more than a start and an end keyframe for layers. And Storyboard Pro 4 doesn't work with that. So if you try to open a project inside Storyboard Pro 4, you will not get the proper, it won't work. You might think it worked, but it won't work. You cannot go from 5 to 4, but you can go from 4 to 5. There's no problem. So all the projects that already exist can be opened in 5. You can save them in 5, but once they're saved in 5, you cannot open them back in 4.2.
Cool. Next question. Does the animate slash transform brackets, you're using the cloud as an example, work over several panels? If so, how do you set that up?
Yeah, so this is very similar to how it used to work inside the previous version. So again, I'll just make my background with my tree, and I'll make my cloud here. I'll duplicate this panel a couple of times, and now the animation on the layer can only be done on per panel. So I could animate the cloud on several panels, but I would need to do it individually, and that's kind of a pain. The easiest way is you animate it on the first panel, and then you spread the layer motion to the other panel. So I first go to the first frame of the panel using the first frame button here. I turn on the animation. I go to the last frame of the panel. I move my cloud here. Now you can see that my cloud is animated on the first panel, but not on the other panels. And the next thing that I'll do is I'll go in my layer menu. I'll go and select spread layer motion. So I'm on the first panel. I use the spread layer motion with the cloud selected. This opens the spread layer motion dialog. And from here, I can select to spread the layer motion on all panels in the same scene. I click OK, and this will break the motion and spread it to all the panels inside my scene.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit about Flix? And you don't have Flix on your laptop, do you?
I do have Flix. I haven't been
using much of it.
Yes.
So Toon Boom does have a Flix expert with the Foundry as well. So obviously a lot of you might know about that. But one of the questions, or two of the questions we've gone so far, is there a way to export, import to and from Flix?
Yes. So that's what we've been working with the guys at the Foundry, the guys at Flix, our good friend Yotis, is to be able to take whatever you bake inside Storyboard Pro and import it into Flix, and also be able to bring back data from Flix into Storyboard Pro. So the way we do it is we use the XML format. So under File, Confirmation, if you export your project using this command, this creates an XML. You need to export this XML into the Flix folder that you have inside your Documents folder, or you need to notify Flix. You export this, and once the export is completed, Flix will automatically import all the images that were exported out of Storyboard Pro. We'll put the proper timing. It will also export all the captions. I don't remember if we have an option for that, or if it's already always export captions. So if you have dialogues on your panels or action notes, if you check the export caption, it will also put those captions inside the XML, so that when you import those into Flix, you will be able to see the image, the dialogues, the actions, and also the timing. And even if you have some camera move, Flix will be able to rebuild the camera move. So in Storyboard Pro, when you're drawing, you're either drawing with bitmap or vector technology, but you're drawing inside a drawing that has a proprietary format that only Storyboard Pro can read. So when you're in Flix, it's actually just reading a rendered version of the drawing. So if you want to edit a drawing, so you're in Flix and you want to edit a drawing that was done inside Storyboard Pro, you select your drawing inside Flix, you double click it, and this will launch Storyboard Pro. We'll find the project that panel was created with, and we'll select the panel that contains the drawing, so you can make the modifications inside Storyboard Pro, and then you can export this back to Flix. And to make that process a little bit faster, we have created a couple of scripts. So if I have my scripting toolbar here, if I click here, TB export XML, I have export all panels to Flix, or export selected panel to Flix. So I have some scripts that I can use. And when I run this one here, this will export the selected panels directly to Flix. So there's an easy communication between Flix and Storyboard Pro.
Cool. Can you use the perspective tool with the bitmap drawing yet?
No, that didn't make this cut. This was part of something that I would have really liked to do for version 5, but we didn't have the time to complete that. I'm really looking forward to putting this in a future version. There's a lot of other stuff that I haven't shown yet, mostly on the 3D part that we have added, so I can maybe go and show a bit of that. So to make the process easier when you're working with 3D, we made a lot of improvements. The first improvement is we now support more formats than we did in the past. So we support Alembic and Collada. So these are the two new formats that we support now in Storyboard Pro. We still support FBX, OBJs, and OSB files, but we've added support for those formats. Now, so if I take here a 3D model, and I import it inside my view here. One thing we have added, and let me just move this at the bottom. All right. So one thing we've done to make your life easier when you're working with 3D models is we have a setting in your project properties here that defines the default scale values. So depending on the units you're using inside your 3D software, you might have, when you import your models, they're really, really big and you need to scale them down every time you bring them in. So instead of having to do that manually, you can decide on a specific value. And every time that you import a model, it will use that scale factor to scale the model in. But let's say I've already imported a model like this model here, and I want to scale it after it's been imported. If I duplicate my panel here and I select the model and where's the scale handle on this? Oh, it's locked. I cannot scale it for sure. If I scale it on this panel, it will only scale it on the one panel that I'm scaling it. I want to scale it on all the panels. So I can actually select the model in my 3D models folder, right-click the model, select Set Scale Factor. I type in the scale factor that I want, 0.01, and now all the panels that use this model have the new scale factor. So this is a very fast way to scale a model across all the panels that you have inside your Storyboard Pro project.
Just very quickly, some people are asking about this webinar and whether it'll be recorded and placed online. It will be online within the next couple of days, so you guys can watch it again. So we've had a couple of questions as well about importing files. So one of them is it possible to import a movie file and work on top of that?
No, this is not something that's possible inside the Storyboard Pro so far. It's something that we are considering for the future for sure.
We're only human, basically. We can only do a few things at a time. Next question: is there a feature in Storyboard format instead of only 16 by 9 format? Basically, are there other formats other than 16 by 9?
So I guess you're meaning for the camera size?
Yes.
So for the camera size, you can basically define the format that you want. The only restriction that you have is the pixels are always square pixels. So how do you define the aspect ratio of your camera? Just in your properties here, in the project resolution, just change the width and the height of your camera. That's the width and the height of your camera in pixels. And you can put any type of ratio values, and this will change the ratio of the camera. And if there's something that you use a lot, you can actually create, let me go back here, project resolution. So if I want to use a resolution like 2000 by 1000, and I want to use that, so it has an aspect ratio of 2, I want to save that, I can just click on the small diskette here, and I can call this 2 for 1, like this. Click OK, and I have now a new preset called 2 for 1. I click OK, this will change my camera shape. As you can see here, it's now twice as wide as high. And if I go in my new dialog or in my welcome screen, and I have the 2 for 1 resolution preset, and I'll just delete it because I don't want to have it there. Let me go back here. All right. Now, going back to the 3D functionality, something that we've added that makes it a lot easier is the way you manipulate the camera inside 3D. So if you're working with a 3D model in a 3D scene, most likely you want to see through the camera. I don't like manipulating the camera from outside of my model. I really like to be behind the camera, so I always use a camera view. And to manipulate the camera view, to rotate it, you just click anywhere in the camera view with your camera tool selected. You click and you drag, and this will rotate your camera on the Y, on the X axis. You can also use the small controller in the middle here to move left and right. And you'll notice that this is very different than what we had before. So before, if I was just clicking on the frame here and moving, this would move the camera by the amount of pixels that I drag. But if I click and I drag on the circle in the middle, it moves the camera at different speeds based on the distance I drag from the middle dot there. So this makes it a lot faster to navigate very large models. You don't have to click, drag, click, drag, click, drag. Just click, you drag, and this will move it at different speeds. And this little circle here, if I press all the Alt key, and then I click it, I can move forward and backwards as well, the camera. So this makes it very, very easy to manipulate the camera from the camera view. Now if I add another model here, I'll just add a 3D model right here. It's a little bit big, I'll make it smaller like that. So when you're working with 3D models, the challenge is, or 3D characters, the challenge is always getting them to have their feet on the floor. So one thing we've added for the transform tool is two options. Actually one operation here called snap to ground. And when I use this, you can see that the character drops to the next plane that's under him. So the next surface that it meets, it will stop there. So this allows you to place it on the ground on the next surface that's just below. But we have another option here called snap to 3D surface. And this is a mode of the transform tool. When I enable this mode, I disable the rotation. And when I click and I drag my character, the pivot of the character will snap to the surface that's under my mouse visually. So as I move my mouse around, you can see that when the mouse goes over the column, the pivot goes over the column. When it goes back to the wall, it goes back to the wall. So it's very easy to position the character in the 3D space using that mode. So I'll just rotate the camera here, take the transform tool, place the character, turn back on my rotation because I want to rotate the character. And I make sure that I add a camera keyframe at the first panel. Now I just want to really quickly do a small pan or camera rotation and have my character moving forward. I'll duplicate my panel. I'll take my transform tool again, disabling the rotation. I'll move the character forward. I'll take my camera tool. I'll rotate the camera and maybe move it a little bit backwards, like this. I'll duplicate the panel again. Take my character moving forward again. And you see it's very, very easy to do some sort of camera move like this and to move your character on the 3D. And using the snap to surface, I'm always sure that the character is standing on the ground. Now when I was using the snap to surface, I turned off the rotation because the rotation will actually rotate your model to face the surface. In the case of this character, it means that it will be lying on his back. If I go to the wall, it will be facing the wall. So I usually don't turn that on when I'm working with 3D models. But if I'm working with a 2D drawing, so maybe I want to have a poster on a wall, I'll want to create a layer, and then I'll want to put it on the surface of the wall. So I'll use the rotation to make sure it's facing the wall.
Cool. So we have another 14 minutes or 13 minutes, so we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Please keep submitting your questions. We'll do our best to answer them. Another interesting one that we should talk about is, are there any improvements with the color palettes?
Since version 4.2, no, it's pretty much the same. Yeah, we have the same color palette we had in the past.
It's a good color palette. Can you tell us a little bit more about the stereoscopic 3D camera view in Storyboard Pro 5?
Stereoscopic 3D.
Can you use it?
No, we don't have the ability to do any stereoscopy directly inside Storyboard Pro. You have the ability to do that inside Harmony. You can set up multiple cameras, but for now in Storyboard Pro you have only one camera and you cannot render in stereoscopy.
Is it possible to draw over a 3D model without a model occulating the artwork? Also, can you draw on a layer if you're using a 3D camera?
Yes, so that's a very, very good question, and that was the next thing I wanted to show you. So I think you're working for us. I'll send you the check later. So the challenge when you're working with a 3D scene, a 3D camera, is that, let's say I add a 2D layer here, a vector layer. If I want to draw, this layer is not facing my camera. It's at an angle somewhere. So if I'm not facing that layer, I cannot draw on it. I can go in the stage view and say face camera, and then I'll be able to draw on that layer. If I go back to my camera view, you can see how this layer was oriented. And now I can use the layer menu here, select align layer to camera, and this places the layer in front of the camera. But that's kind of a complicated workflow. Oops, I dropped my pen.
Oh
no! We have a much simpler workflow now, and this is done using the create layer on surface. So if I use this tool, when I click on the tool, you see I have a crosshair, and the crosshair appears under my mouse and over the surface where it's going to be creating the layer. So you can see that it's a lot bigger if I move it forward, and if I go in the back, it gets smaller. When I click, if I click and hold, I'll actually see the drawing grid and where the drawing will be created. So for example, I want to add something to this character. I want to draw some shorts on the character. I'll just create the layer there. I'll take my brush tool. Let me just zoom in on the character here, and I'll be able to, whoa, that's a big brush. So I'm pressing the O key, clicking and dragging to change the size of the brush, and I will draw him some nice little shorts right here. So it's very, very easy to draw, to add a layer and create it as close as you can to the surface. So now if I zoom back and I move the camera, you can see that this layer was added facing the camera, so I was able to draw, but it was also added just in front of the character right there. So if I go in my stage view and I rotate, you can see it's just a normal 2D layer. Now, if I take my camera here and I rotate my camera, so I'm in the camera view, I select my camera frame, I go through that frame. If I rotate the camera, I like go, oops, I'm hiding behind in a column. There we go. I can see the layer, and I see the side of the layer. I see it's a paper layer. I don't want to see that, so one thing I can do is from my layers view, I can enable a mode. So I have layer alignment here. I have no alignment. I have face camera, and I have pin to camera. So if I use the face camera, and actually it went behind the character, the layer will always be facing the camera. So the important part here is where the pivot for your layer is. And if I take my transform tool, I'll move the pivot somewhere like this. That now, and if I move the camera again, you see that the layer is always facing the camera. It's not, I don't see the side of the layer anymore. But this is a lot more convenient when you're actually drawing, let's say, a whole character. So I can use the same tool, create layer and surface. Let's say I want to add a character. There's a character missing in that scene. I'll click on that tool again. And I'll click and I'll drag and I'll release the mouse wherever I want to create a character. So it's here I want to create a character. I'll release, and I'll be able to draw on this layer. I want to draw with black color. I want to see the grid. There we go. And you can see where the grid was, where the drawing was created. So now I can just, oh, it's really big. Create my character. And then that's a very easy way to create a character, create a layer to draw directly on it.
Excellent. So next question is, can you please talk about the programmable action script, please?
Yes.
Maybe a little.
Yes. So that's the one subject I most of the time finish with. And it's not action script; it's Qt script. So yes. It's a language that allows you to automate some of the commands, some of the features inside Storyboard Pro. So let me add a scripting view. So to add a view, I can either go in the Windows menu and select the view I want to add, or click on the plus button that's in any viewport, and I select script editor, and this as the script editor. So this is the same, for those of you that are familiar with Harmony, this is the same scripting language that we're using in Harmony. Of course, we needed to bind it to the functions inside Storyboard Pro. So if you look, we have created a couple of scripts with the software, some examples, and some of them that are useful to show you to show how you can create. So I've got here a script that I like a lot, and this is a feature that was requested a lot. Is called delete hidden layers, and you can see the script here. And what the script does is it will go through the selected panels. So you select some panels. So let's say I go here, I select this panel and I hide the A layer on this panel, and I'll hide the BG layer on this one, and the A layer again. I select all of these panels. Now I want to run the script. I'm writing the script and I want to test the script out. I have the run script button here. I just need to select the file and the script. I click OK, and this tells me, oh, these layers have been deleted. So they're all in scene 1 on panel 4, 6, and 7. It deleted layer A, layer BG, and layer A. And I click OK. And if I go back to those panels, you can see that I don't have the A layer here anymore. The BG layer is gone here, and the A layer is gone there as well. So that's an example of a script that we've created. Another script that we've created is the set proportional length. So if you want to change the duration of a scene and you want all the panels to change proportionally with it, you can select the panels. So let's say I have panels with different duration, and I want to run the script like this. And when I run the script, it tells me what's the current duration and what is the new duration I want to have for my scene, so maybe 500 frames. I click OK, and now it changed the duration of all the panels proportionally to make it to kind of stretch my scene. So these are the some of the simple scripts that we have. Another one is 3D report. This will do a report of all the 3D assets that you have in your project, which scene they're in and which panel they're in. We also have the export camera. So if you want to export your camera path, I think this exports the camera information in a JSON file. So if you just want to extract the camera information from your project, you can use the script to do that. And we have, of course, the export XML. So all of these scripts, or their Qt script, they're very, very similar to JavaScripts, have functions. And what you do when you want to use one of those scripts, you don't want to have to go in the script editor every time you want to run a script. You want to have buttons for those scripts inside your interface. So any of the toolbar that are customizable, for example, this toolbar here, you can right-click and customize them and add the buttons that you want, or you can add them to the actual scripting toolbar. So I've added the scripting toolbar to my workspace earlier, scripting. And if I click on the F with an arrow here, this opens this script manager. I can select, so first I need to select in which script file is the function I want to add a button for. So let's say I want to have the delete layers. I want to have the delete, no, not the delete, but the delete hidden layers function. I select the delete hidden layers function, and I click the arrow here. This adds it to my toolbar. I can change the order of the buttons here. Click OK, and this will add it to the toolbar. I can also set a customized icon, so I can browse for a PNG file, and this will be used as the button for my script. So now I have the script here, and I don't need anymore to run the scripting command. I can just select the panels, click the button, and it runs the script.
Cool. We're just about out of time, but let's see if we can squeeze in one more question. We have 3 minutes. Don wants to know, and I quote, may I ask, is the attached to surface for 3D in Storyboard Pro available in Harmony Premium?
Oh, so so let's see, the attached to surface. Is it the snap to surface we're talking about?
I would think so.
Yeah, the snap to surface is actually something new that we've added for Storyboard Pro. So Harmony doesn't have this yet.
Yeah.
It's something that I guess we could add in the future. But no, it's only something that's available in Storyboard Pro because it was just, it's brand new, right out of the oven.
Good. Okay, well, we do have 2 more minutes. We're really just going to stretch it out to the end. Julia wants to know, she was a little bit late in joining, so she's apologizes if the question's been covered before, but she says, will there be a blur tool? Can you show us a little bit more about a blur tool in Storyboard Pro?
So I accept your apology for being late. So we do have a blur function inside Storyboard Pro, which will run the blur on, which will blur a drawing. For example, I have this character here. I drew this character in vector. I cannot use the blur command on a vector layer. I need to use this on a bitmap layer. So I need to convert my layer to a bitmap layer first. I usually make a duplicate of my layer. If it's a vector layer, I duplicate my layer first before converting because I want to keep a copy of the original artwork. Then I can convert this to a bitmap layer. I have options here for the pixel factor, the scale, the width factor, the number of pixels I want inside my drawing. I'll just do it HDTV. This converts my artwork to bitmap, and now I'm able to right-click again and select blur bitmap, and I select the value that I want, and this will apply the blur to the layer. So this is another reason why I usually duplicate my layer before blurring, because I want to keep an original copy of the layer before the blur, just in case I need to go back to it.
Cool. It's 3 o'clock. You finished right on the nose. We did not answer a lot of the questions, and we really apologize for that. We'll try to come back with another webinar later on. Hopefully being able to cover your questions. You can always send us an email at webinars@toonboom.com, or you can send an email to the support team, and maybe they'll be able to answer your questions as well. We do have tutorials online on our website, so if you go to toonboom.com, you'll find the tutorials and learning materials section for Storyboard Pro 5, and you'll be able to download material there. So we really hope that this webinar was helpful, and we hope that you enjoyed learning about some of the new features. And thank you to Marc-André.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and until next time.